So tonight we have the Venerable Jino and Venerable Dhammavaro right behind me there. And I had mentioned it that they are coming from, both of them are coming from Baigiri currently. And so Venerable Jino is actually from Temple Monastery, and he's spending his year away, and he's decided to come over to Abaigiri for the year, and then part of that, since we are the sub branch of Abaigiri, he's decided to come here for a few months. And Dhammavaro and I'm sorry, and Jino ordained about 2 years ago as a bhikkhu. And Dhammavaro, I was at your ordination last year. Was it June?
May, Aja.
It was May. Okay, all right. Yeah. And so it's been not quite a year, but almost. And that was very lovely. Your parents were there and everything. So Jino, going back to Jino for a moment, is from Massachusetts, and Dhammavaro is from Texas, Austin, Texas. So that's a brief introduction, and I just want to encourage people to ask questions of the monks, and it's a nice way also to introduce the local community to them, because they're walking alms rounds, and I think they've been enjoying that. It's been since it's such a lovely thing that this monastery has a very special quality of the Pacific Hermitage. So is there anything either one of you would like to say in terms of introduction? Any sort of interesting things about yourselves? What you did before you were ordained?
Yeah, tell us about your route to
your lives.
Well, I could maybe pick up on the first question, the first part of the question, which was something maybe about like what it's been like being here a little bit. Was it maybe you were trying to get at?
Sure.
And,
we can start with that.
Yeah, it's been very nice. It's a very different atmosphere because, I just feel more of the engagement with kind of the lay community, and in that sense, the everyday, how the monk's livelihood is gone about, and receiving requisites and really relying on the lay people, and seeing that in-person exchange is very beautiful and very inspiring and very nurturing, in the sense that when you reflect on how did I get everything I needed to live today, it's very direct, and you feel that warmth between you and the people who you had an exchange with, and it's always surprising to see how those exchanges go about. So that's been probably the most interesting thing going on for me here so far.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, I think I was reflecting this afternoon that it almost feels like a cycle, that I start the day with alms round, and that I feel really uplifted and really encouraged to practice, and I feel like it comes through in the donors as well. It seems like so many people here have been just giving open-handedly for such a long time that you see the joy, at least I've seen the joy in people's faces when they give. And so I think it's kind of this like almost like loop. It's like we inspire each other. It's like I go back to the monastery and I'm really inspired to practice, and then people are probably inspired to give based on whatever fruits come from our practice. So I feel like it's really this nice exchange between the two.
Is there a bit of a, since both of you were talking about the alms round, is there a quality that you're noticing that was different in the alms rounds you've done, both at Temple and Baigiri? I'm not actually sure. I mean, I believe you've done some alms rounds there, right? I'm not sure if it's weekly.
Yeah, it's different. On those, you more walk through town, and there are a couple invitations from markets who, are very generous, and but there's something different about going up to someone's door and them offering like a plate of fruit or something they prepared, took that time to make. So you reflect on, oh yeah, they were thinking about us and they were caring, and that just, you know, brings up a lot of those qualities in ourselves, and what do I care for, and helps nurture those qualities. So that's been the big difference, that personal exchange.
I think the sense of dependence comes up a lot, and so sometimes I feel like that could be lacking in an alms round, maybe at a Bayagiri, where you're still not, you don't have to depend on that food. And so there's kind of this, I think it sets up a different dynamic in the mind, where it's kind of like, I think there's something about exposing oneself as a bhikkhu and just really saying that I'm willing to accept whatever generosity I receive directly today. And yeah, I think that I found his weight different, because always in the back of my mind, usually going alms round at a Bayagiri, it's like, I know there's going to be food. It doesn't matter if we get anything necessarily on alms round, you know, like I know there's kind of that guarantee in the mind, like I'm going to get fed. And so I think it sets up quite a different dynamic.
Can I ask a question? I'm just curious about, I always like hearing, you know, a brief summary of people's path to ordination and to robes. So I always find it inspiring. So I wondered if you would speak about that quickly.
Sure. Yeah, reflecting on that a little bit, because that's kind of a common question you hear, and one it's always different, and one I've never really gone to say like, oh yeah, I really feel like I honestly answered that in the best way. That included all the parts, and I was able to pick up a couple things this week, actually, in reflections from what some lay people said, who came to the monastery and alms round. And one was like, kind of feeling like you've been cultivating goodness for a long time, and so then when that openness comes to pursue some type of path that's really in the forefront, the mission is to develop goodness, then that's very attractive. And to me, that's where it really clicked, like something, oh yeah, I could do this. I don't need to, you know, develop a lot of different types of skills at the beginning, you know, a huge training in the sense of some type of PhD and all these degrees and qualifications and knowing certain people. It's something I could just give myself to as I was, you know, with some type of open heart. And yeah, I was kind of looking for something in my last 2 years of college, and for some reason, yeah, the word like Buddha came up, and I was thinking, I remember this week, the first time I think I heard that word was in like a 7th grade history class of world religions, and something just about the word like Buddha was like, that's cool. I was like, like, yeah, Buddha, yeah. I was like, something just sounded so like great about it, just the simple word itself. I'm like, and just I've always had this positive association with it. So when I was looking for something like wholesome to cultivate, I was like, all right, like Buddhism, what's that all about? Like, that seems something like kind of sublime and something like subtle, leading to some type of truth I haven't yet grasped. And so I ordered a book on Buddhism, and since then I've been in in-depth investigation of it.
Good.
Nice question.
Nice
answer.
I think I had to try many different things and learn that those things didn't work out before coming here. So it almost feels like becoming a monk was like I had to cross off everything on the list of things that I thought I could do in my life. And so I crossed everything out, and then, okay, I guess I'll try to be a monk now.
Here's your bucket list. Is the last one.
Yeah, that's kind of, yeah, you
All
go
right.
through the whole list, you're like, okay, monk. Try. We'll see.
Right.
We'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
I think somewhere before getting straight to monk, I think I had come to a point in my life where I was not so certain about pursuing like getting a graduate degree, and I had worked for a year after graduating from undergrad, and wasn't feeling very excited about working. To something about it, neither one seemed kind of on an intuitive sense that it was really, it just wasn't making me very happy. I could tell at the end of the day. And so I remember a friend told me she was also kind of having a similar phase, and she said, oh, you want to go traveling somewhere? And she said 2 places. She said, I really want to go to Africa or Asia. I remember stopping her and being like, we're definitely going to Asia. I felt, really, something, I can't really explain what happened, but I think something awoke inside that I started to think about, oh yeah, maybe there's something there. And so I took my first meditation course during that trip, and then was about a lay practitioner for about 6 years. And so I think I had some time to start to develop the precepts, have a regular practice, and start to see the benefits of just incorporating these things in my life. And then I think I started to have more moments and reflections that I wasn't sure about so many things in life, but I could see that the more I started to practice and really incorporate that and merge that into my life, that made the most sense. There's something really there. And so, I think it came to a point where, I think it's a little bit of a leap of faith to go to a monastery and ordain, especially in the West. But I think I had come to that point where, this seems like the best thing. And I think I would have regretted not doing it. I think I remind myself of that. And so I'm really glad and really grateful to be here and, to undergone what I have.
I'm just wondering, after hearing both of those stories, how do you both compare? Like, now you've been doing it for over 2-3 years. You've been in the monastery for, or actually 4 years you've been doing this, and 3 years you've been doing this, because I think most people know who are listening, but some who don't. In the West, we the monks who ordain in the Ajahn Chah tradition in the West have almost always gone through a year of being a pakao, an anagarika. So it's equivalent to like what's in the Catholic tradition like a postulant. So they wear white and follow what are the 8 precepts, which is sort of the amped up 5 precepts from the normal precepts that lay people will take on. So one of those is celibacy. Another is not eating in the afternoon. Another is not sleeping on a high or luxurious place. So with those, that's a whole year of doing that in our tradition, and that's sort of testing the waters. And both of you did that, and then after that year is completed, if they're interested, then they can ask to be a novice monk. For usually that's a year as well, and that's a little bit closer. So they're encouraged to follow many of the Vinaya rules. Formally, they give up the use of money, and then it's they're actually wearing not white anymore. They're wearing brown, and they're hard to distinguish between the bhikkhus who live in the monastery, the novice monks, the samaneras. They just don't wear this third robe, nor follow the precepts of the bhikkhus. That they're sort of not held by those precepts as much, but they're aiming towards them. So I'm just wondering the qualities that you found from when you first had an interest, and then you became, you started working in a monastery in those 2, 3, now 4 years. what that's been like in comparison to your aspiration when you first entered the robes.
Do you want to start this one off, Dhammavaro?
So, just to clarify the question, beginning of the monastery life till now.
Yeah, sort of like how you compare, like, for myself, for example, it was very different. The idea I had of what being a sort of monastic would be, and what being an anagarika, samanera, and especially bhikkhu, compared to kind of what it is like, living. It's like living that way.
This might even be a good question for Nisabho, because he was here, or he was at Abhayagiri when I was a layman. So he was at Abhayagiri about 2 months before I became, a few months before I became a Pakal, and then my whole anagarika year he was there as well. And I remember we had several conversations where I was just absolutely miserable.
Yeah, you're not happy for some of that time. It's true.
You mean you didn't just enter the monastery and you're on a cloud of just like
glowing.
Pure peace and glowing, and people came up and said little wise things to you, and then you'd say, "Oh wow," you entered the first track of the light. No, it wasn't like that. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, I don't know. I think from my experience being in the monastery, I've seen it vary from person to person, how well they take that transition.
Yeah.
Not intentionally, but I just came in with way too many ideals about how practice was going to go. I think I had this conception that I didn't really tell myself, but now reflecting on it, I can see more that it's like I have to be very austere. Please respectfully, like, get out of my way. I've gotta do this practice. I gotta take care of what needs to be taken care of. And so if you want me to do the dishes, I will do them unhappily and then try to leave as soon as possible. I mean, I think deep down, I think to a certain extent I could conduct myself in a somewhat harmonious way, but I could see myself kind of getting overwhelmed by just small daily tasks like that. And I think there is this lesson in, I think, many that I had to learn the hard way, especially the first 2 years or so, that it's not all about me and getting somewhere.
It's a great answer.
Yeah, and it's an answer that that people, I think, still struggle with years in the robes, sometimes decades in the robes. So it's a good insight to have had early on. Jino, you
similar in those aspects of what you want it to be. Quick results, fast, bliss, nonstop, still mind in all circumstances, and ability to do the toughest tasks with ease. But yeah, how do we get there? Even if we do want to get there, how do we start now? Is I felt like more looking towards like what I said, really doing things for the result rather than more for the process. And that's actually where I feel like I found the most peace nowadays, just focusing on the present. How am I working with whatever is now, and all these mistakes of ups and downs. I've only been doing this for a few years now, I guess almost 4 years, and but I think with each mistake I've gained a little bit more patience, and that's the most nurturing quality I'd say I have, like to rely on now, is just the patience. And because it's like, all right, don't have to go anywhere, just relax, just be present, be open, don't try to get anything, and just learning patience, which is something I've never really had to at least a foremost quality, and now I really respect what the Buddha had to say about patience being the highest virtue, which really leads you to the destination. So patience as a means of of getting to where you want to get to, and rather than that effort, which is just kind of futile in the long run. So, and just it's being a process seems to go. It's just more enjoyable, I think, as you relax a little bit, and so enjoying the learning process more. It's definitely still difficult every day in different ways, but I mean, that's also, there's a joy in knowing that you're working towards that as well.
Sadhu.
Do you have any question I can ask from here? This was a question about essentially an understanding of the first 5 years, and why in this particular time. I think I explained it a little bit, but there was an assumption that you stay with your preceptor, or you stay under the guidance of your teacher for 5 years. So why have you left?
Well, there is an allowance to go away, usually your 3rd year, and I did request to go. I was a little maybe, well, in a way you could say, to be antsy, but not like, to be honest, I was quite honest with my teacher, Ajahn Janto, and said like how I felt like I could really use some type of a change, in the sense of, like I touched on before, like patience for that, for the purpose of being able to stay in the training in the long run. Like, what can I do now that's going to benefit me in the long run? And I could see there were some things that I kind of wanted to just kind of like stretch my arms a little bit, open up, have a couple different experiences to round out my monastic life. And in the West, it's not like there's so many monasteries all next door to each other, or you rarely get to see other monks, other Kruba Ajahns, the teachers, other monasteries, how they operate, so you can kind of have a small view of what it's like to be a monk, and what monastic life is like, and what type of mold you have to fit into. So I was looking to just kind of soften that mold, and friendship's just so important in the holy life. It really is. And just learning the good qualities of other monks, and we help show each other what helps us, what doesn't, and just being there for each other. Just that community is so important. So that's what I've been doing this year.
We like having you as part of the community, Jino.
Yes.
It's very welcome.
Yeah.
Very happy
Very nice
you're
to
here.
be here.
Someone said, just a comment, that I remember telling someone in temple that I'd never seen a monk as happy as Jino looked there. They wanted to know, did you train somewhere else before coming to temple, or was it only in temple?
Yeah. Yep. Just in temple.
Just temple. So I guess you just came there happy.
I mean, it's very good. I mean, I guess I should touch on, temple is a beautiful place, great community. Ajahn Janto is very skillful in the way he leads things, and it's very suitable for a training too. I gained a lot from being there, and so definitely, it's been wholesome from the start. Just being there, when I asked myself, is this something I could do? It was like the first time in my life I was like, yeah, I could do this. And so in that sense, that's, you gain happiness from doing something you want to do. So that's, I think, where a lot of it comes from.
So that, just to be clear around the question, so monks are under the guidance of their preceptor or their teacher that they take on for the first 5 years of being a bhikkhu, and then after that they can ask to spread their wings a bit more. Sometimes there's qualifying things that also need to happen before a monk will kind of live on his own, or kind of start to make decisions on his own about where he goes. But in our tradition, especially in the Western monasteries, then as Jino mentioned, just before one's third vasa as a monk, so third rainy season, right before that, then monks tend to are invited by their teacher to go somewhere else. But that doesn't mean that they're not under the guidance of their teacher. So they're still doing that under the auspices of that dependence that they have on that teacher. So it's an interesting question why Dhammavaro is here, because he's not entering his third vasa, he's entering his second vasa. So perhaps Dhammavaro can answer that.
Sure.
Sort of a trick question.
Yeah, at least from what I've seen happen at a Bayagiri, that it's maybe a special opportunity that monks have at a Bayagiri, and it definitely is a source of gratitude for me to have an opportunity to go to a hermitage like this. And so I think it's definitely something that I've seen many Bayagiri monks go at this time in their monastic life, and at different intervals as well before their fifth reigns. So it's something that I've never asked Lampavasano, my preceptor, directly, but it seems like it's something he supports. And so definitely it's something where I'm still quite under his dependence, but it's yeah, I think it feels like a chance maybe for bhikkhus to have that experience, to kind of spread their wings out, but in a kind of safe place that's well known by the preceptor, and that the preceptor thinks that monks will be able to benefit from.
Yeah, and I guess I was also getting at that the Pacific Hermitage is a sub-branch of a Bayagiri. So it's, I think it might be the first branch of a branch. So I think a Bayagiri was at first a branch of Amravati, but not technically, because it was started by two monks, one from Thailand and the other from who spent a lot of his time in England, Dhammavaro. So in terms of our system, though, that this hermitage is actually a sub-branch. It's not a branch monastery. So it's under
sprig, a twig.
Sort of, yeah. It's under the auspices of a Bayagiri, and so the relationship with the Bayagiri is very direct. So almost always the monks who spent time at Bayagiri come to stay here, and so in Dhammavaro's case, why it's not before his 30 years, he's not spending a year away, but the hermitage does allow monks to come here for different times. It could even be a year, but it's not necessarily part of that third year of going away, because it's such a closely associated monastery, and there's a common exchange between the two of us, of our monasteries. So yeah, that's I appreciated hearing both of those things from you. It opens the eyes a bit. Was there anything else you had? I can ask a question from here.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's great.
So how are this was talking about how are these things changing as the American forest tradition compared to like the forest tradition in Thailand? So this is actually a good question for Venerable Nisabho to answer, because he has actually had a lot more experience in Thailand. And I also wanted to ask, what you've seen as different, and also in kind of relationship to being a new monk, and what you've kind of gathered in terms of your training as a newer monk in your earlier years in Thailand compared to kind of what you're seeing here.
That's a good question. I think in Thailand there's I think one of the ethics of the monastic form, which is difficult for Westerners to sort of come to terms with at first, is the hierarchy and the formality and the ritual. And in Thailand, those are built deeply into the culture, and people tend to hold them quite naturally. You know, most Thais will have grown up with monastics in their life, and at some level, and given alms as a child, and it's works quite well because Thailand also is, I mean, Buddhist culture is wound so deeply into it that it's, I think, perhaps a fourth to a third almost of, I think a fourth of Thai language originates from Pali, the scriptural language of Buddhism. It's so deeply entwined in the culture. And you see what that's done to the culture over time. It's not for nothing that it's known as the land of smiles. And so there seems to be a natural levity and love in the culture, which really balances out the forms which characterize the Theravada. So the rigidity in certain ways, or the hierarchy, the austerity, are all balanced by this sort of undercurrent of metta through the culture. And that is difficult for sometimes Westerners to step into. It was for me, because from our upbringing, whether from like the Judeo-Christian heritage and original sin, or just the rife consumerist culture, I think we have a lot of we're just a lot of self-flagellation as Westerners, and you mix that with the austerity and rigidity of some of our forms in the Theravada, and it's like mixing acid with acid. And in Thailand, that's especially dangerous, because the sort of metta aspects of the culture are all just there, and they aren't articulated in a certain way, or taught or embodied in a way that's really accessible for Westerners. So unless you're quite skillful, you can really go, things can go pear-shaped quite quickly. Whereas in the West, I've seen the Kruba Ajahns adjust the tradition to move towards what you both were speaking of, in terms of the beauty of community. Not that there isn't that to a large extent in Thailand, but that focus on community, on being more gentle, like what you were saying, Dhammavaro, Longpo Pasano and others really make room for monastics to find various ways of expressing themselves through like art and things like that, and allow them a little more space to travel and to spread their wings. And it just seems like the Western training is trying to mix in a certain amount of softness or softening to the tradition, and that's really healthy. And I think allowing monks to, see what their needs are, in your case, Tenjino, maybe departing from your home monastery slightly early, or coming up here, and express that is one way that the senior teachers are trying to soften the tradition a bit and mix in a bit of alkaline. So, yeah, and just having lived with both of you for the past week or so, I mean, it's beautiful though. I mean, for example, it's Songkran today, and we just had a little ritual where we got to sort of pay respects to Ajahn Chunda and wash his hands, which is something you do for a senior monk, and he was very embarrassed, but it was a very sweet thought on Jino's part, and there's a certain sparkle which you can bring into things, and these two seem to have just embodied it beautifully, and I think it speaks to Longpo Pasano's training. So that's one of the biggest changes I've seen. Yeah. And it's really lovely to live with these two, so I'm glad that they're going to be at the Hermitage with everyone.
Yeah, it is over the years, seeing monks who've trained in Thailand and then other monks who've trained in the West, it's I can't really mark a qualitative difference in terms of like better or worse. So I wouldn't say one can necessarily make a generalization around that. But it's interesting that the training tends to be, it has a different feel to it. So for that reason, there is crossover that is encouraged. So monks in the West are encouraged to spend some time in Thailand, for example, because that's where the tradition came from. And one of the things I think that Western monks get out of that when they do end up going to Thailand is their eyes get to be a bit more open around, oh, this is why I do this particular thing or that particular thing, and they get to see a lot more of like where it is that the tradition is coming from. I suppose it's something like maybe like Jewish people going to Israel or something like that, where there's just such a more tie to a particular place and land that might not be had, and then the tradition is seen a bit more clearly. So I've seen that as quite a nice thing. And then when you see monks who come from Thailand who then come to live in America, then you see how they adapt, and that's also quite interesting because that it doesn't always work in both directions. Sometimes people have a sense of this is how I was raised, like in Thailand or in a particular Thai monastery, and it's not. It doesn't. I don't kind of feel the same vibe here, or I'm not liking it as much, or I just feel more comfortable in that other place. And the same I think is true in the West for people who go to Thailand. So it can have that, and that's one of the reasons that we do encourage kind of moving around a bit as monks, and we get to kind of bump up against our own discomforts, and that's a lot of what's quite helpful. I think after my 7th Vasa, I left Abhayagiri, or just before the 7th Vasa, and then I was gone for about 6.5 years or so. And there was a lot of, there were some rough edges there to be worn down. And it's quite helpful to get out of the box, to kind of try new things, what both of the two monks here are doing, coming here. And I'm really grateful to have them. So I'm really happy that they've come, and happy that they're also getting to know the local community, and they have this great opportunity to go on alms round daily. And as Dhammavaro was saying, how that really having a really excellent reliance on that sustenance being provided by the lay people who are supporting our practice, and the fact that we can't actually live without that. So it's quite a beautiful thing. I think that is that's offered here specifically at the Hermitage. I've mentioned that before. But also it's it's just really nice to have some monks who are newer in the training too, and see how I actually take to that myself. But I also wanted to ask you, there was a question here for the two of you around teacher. So the question was, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And I just wanted to ask the two of you, do you have any kind of resonance with that, like in terms of your experience with maybe before you were monks, and now like actually having a teacher, and what that means to you, and I'm not just meaning a preceptor, but just anyone who you found at the monastery that you take as someone who you're kind of looking to for guidance.
Sure, yeah, I guess there's a lot of different ways to interpret that type of question. For me, I tend to want to go back to the present moment and how I would deal with that question in the sense of, when you're practicing well or practicing rightly, the teacher, could be considered the Dhamma, might appear and just teach you something, a way of seeing things that you hadn't seen before, or a way of some type of truth that you couldn't really get to on your own per se. It was like you did your part, and then some type of lesson was learned, and so that's kind of how I would like to view it, and how it engages me, that type of experimentation process, more like living dynamically with the truth. and seeing what are the ways that can bring about realizations of any level, just even very small one, even just different ways of saying like, oh yeah, that's a better way of doing things, seeing the peace and the happiness and relaxation that comes from that. That's a very one of my favorite lessons nowadays. So yeah, Dhammavaro.
I feel it's part of monastic life is really just exposing so many things that you never wanted to know about yourself. And so I think there's a lot of vulnerability there. And I think it's almost, now I have enough time as a monastic to be able to look back and to just feel so much gratitude and so much appreciation for the senior monks at Abhayagiri, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to make it, really. I think what helps, for me, was the sense of commitment. I think I see that with people who are junior to me as well. That even when it's difficult, and maybe people can't even necessarily, I know for myself, like people, many ajahns would just sit with me and talk with me and really just give me these very, very patient teachings over long periods of time that, you just totally miss. It's almost something you have to be taught, hundreds and hundreds of times, but maybe that's the beauty of the monastic form, is that everyone's living together, and so you're able to get these lessons very frequently. And so I think that's where the two kind of come together, where one is willing to commit to the practice, and especially commit to that, a form like monasticism, that teachers can maybe start to pick up on that and respond to that and say, I can sense where this person, they're struggling, and I'm going to try to do what I can to help them, because you kind of see that sincerity. You can kind of feel that willingness of people to want to train. So I think that's the nice kind of gap that I see, that the two pieces kind of come together. And so I think with that, that the quote again is, the teacher is,
when the student is ready, the teacher arrives.
Yeah, I think a lot of that on the student's end is just willing to commit to it through whatever happens, see it through.
Lumpur Pasna frequently says what distinguishes the monks that make it from those that don't is just stubbornness. So maybe that's what you're speaking to a bit.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think it's also a sense of meaning around the fact that you can have all these teachers around you, but it doesn't mean anything until you're actually, you're open, as you were talking about, you're opening your mind to being able to be taught. And once that opening occurs, then the teacher they're actually there and they're ready. They can actually be approached, or they're ready to teach you. And until that time, many people can come, many teachers can come and try to teach or say something, but without that readiness of mind, that openness to learn, then the teacher doesn't really appear in the student's mind. They're not really there to be able to offer anything. So it's almost like the student, in my eyes, determines the teacher, or is the one who actually is kind of, it's their readiness that allows them to open up, and not until then, and until one is ready, then it can't, that kind of magic that happens between the student and teacher can't really happen. So in many situations, it like the opposite, for the teacher to try to teach a student who's not ready, it just doesn't work. they're just, maybe they're stubborn, or they're, to receive something, whatever it might be. So that's kind of how I've seen it as well. And it's true. It's a very special part of our tradition. Teachers, and each one of us has many stories about our teachers, and without them, where would we be? Fairly lost, I would think. There's very few people who can do this on their own. You almost, as you were talking about friendship, we talk about Kalyanamita, and the Buddha talks about that as the whole of the holy life. So I think most of us have a lot of gratitude towards our teachers, and a very special relationship to them, as long as we're ready for that.
On that note of Kalyanamitta, Ajahn, can I just take the opportunity of this last minute just to express my gratitude to the spiritual friends on this Pacific Hermitage community, and this will be my last live stream. And I've so appreciated being part of that community, and everyone's support of the space and community here is hugely valuable. It's really difficult to find a situation where you can be supported in practice and feel such welcome. So it was a real blessing, and I feel very grateful to have come back from Thailand and landed in the midst of such a family. And I hope our paths continue to cross. And Ajahn Chunda, you were a great teacher, friend, guide, munkle, whatever, while I was here. So thank you so much. And Tan Dhammavaro, Tan Jino, it was a pleasure. So, yeah.
Yeah, it was very lovely. The last, I think I've been here almost 6 months. And Tan Nisabho's been here about just 4.5 months now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A couple days. So it's been a lovely exchange. Good to be with a friend again. We lived together for a few months in Australia. I think many of you know that, as we discussed before. So, and Ajahn Kovilo, who was here for 5 weeks. So quite a nice winter. All of us actually had, I think, very good winter in terms of that was our retreat time. So we're coming off of that, or we're kind of almost back into it in certain ways. So it's lovely to be here with all of you. I'll be at the next live stream at 7 a.m. if I don't forget it, and hopefully we'll see some of you there, and then we'll continue with both Tuesday evenings and Friday mornings for the indefinite future, and see how that works during this uncertain time. Okay, lovely to be with you tonight.